So I am Chuck Adler from Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm here at the 20th International Congress in Berlin. Today is June 22nd, and I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing Dr. Kapil Sethi. Kapil?
Hey Chuck, how are you?
I'm doing great.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It is. Can you just tell us where you are right now?
Oh, I'm working at a medical college in Georgia. It's changed names many times. It used to be called Medical College of Georgia, and now it's called Augusta University.
Augusta University.
Yes, sir.
Which I recently visited, and it's beautiful. Absolutely, a great place for you to work.
Loved having you there, in the Deep South.
In the Deep South. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and maybe what got you into medicine?
Well, I'm from a small town in northern India, in Punjab, and we had a small high school. Most of the people dropped out of high school. They were agriculture, their land everywhere. That's all they did. They dropped out, so I graduated from high school there, and then went to a nice college in a bigger town, and it was rare for anyone in my little town to get into medicine. It used to happen like once every 8 years or so. And
wow.
I was studying to be an engineer, and then my dad, I was 17, and dad says, Kapil, engineering, you know, they're not making good salary anymore, and there's not so many jobs. I think you should do medicine. I said, yes, Dad. And I tried to get into medicine, eventually did into a small medical school called Christian Medical College. It was used to be women's college for many years, and then it became coeducational. So I finished my MBBS there. That's for a degree.
Where was that located?
Again, in northern India, Punjab, a small town called, no, it's not a small town, Ludhiana. That's a big industrial town now. And then I went to Chandigarh, which is another institution which was set by the government. There were 3 big institutes, postgraduate institutes, and I went to Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research. And I actually did my medicine for 4 years and got my degree, and then I did neurology for 2 years. So then at the end, I started, just wanted to do something else, and I left. I wanted to even not finish neurology. I said, I'm going to go abroad and study. And
How old were you at that point?
So 22, I finished med school. 27, I finished my DM, which was a degree in neurology. And then I went to England.
And where in England? Did you know people in England at that time, or this was new for you and your family?
So one of the professors who examined me liked me. He had a good sense of humor, and that wasn't impressed with my talent, but he liked me, and he said, "I'm going to give you a few letters. So if you, when you go to England," and I had relatives. My wife's brother lived there, so I had some support. But what really helped me were the letters of introduction that the professor wrote to his colleagues. He had trained in Queen Square, so he knew a lot of English neurologists.
And where did you wind up then when you went to London?
So it's almost like beggars can't be choosers. I took whatever I could get. I got a fellowship in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which they call motor neuron disease, at the Charing Cross Hospital.
In England, they didn't call it Lou Gehrig's disease, I assume.
No, they don't. A cricketer, if there was some cricketer like Kapil Dev, if he had something bad. So they didn't. They called it motor neuron disease. And so I worked a year at Charing Cross under Frank Clifford Rose. And then I got a registrar's job in Wales, Swansea, Wales, and I tried to get into a house job with David Marston, and I didn't even get interviewed. I wasn't even shortlisted. So I said, well, I don't have any hope.
Amazing when you look back on that that was probably pretty influential, that you didn't get interviewed by David Marston.
Well, obviously I was a strange name from India, and England, there were very few jobs. And I was told actually to get out of England because they said there is no chance that you can become a consultant. They only had 120 consultants in the whole country. And so when I knew that that's not going to work, and I was interested to come to the US anyway, so I came to Augusta and I've stayed there ever since.
So when did you get to Augusta? That was just after training. You already had your fellowship in ALS.
Yes.
And now you moved to Augusta.
Now I went back to general neurology for a year and a half.
Okay.
And then Augusta had a PGY4 job, and I didn't have to do PGY1, 2, and 3. The board made me do another year. So in all, I did about 9 years of residency.
So you're pretty well trained.
I always say you take a donkey, put him through 9 years of training, I think you can make a good neurologist out of that donkey.
So you explained with the engineering going to medicine. Your dad was very influential in that decision. What made you decide on neurology?
So one thing I didn't tell you is that my dad actually is a physician in Ayurvedic medicine. So he had some influence on me because he ran a practice. But I was so young at that stage, I couldn't really decide which way to go. But when I came to England, I was impressed by early days. That was early 80s. And we didn't see a lot of levodopa in India. People were poor, they couldn't afford it. So I didn't see a lot of levodopa dyskinesias and how much it benefited Parkinson's patients.
Right.
And so I diagnosed some. When in England, I got very interested in this dramatic treatment and then the complications. And so as I told you, I tried to get into a fellowship with Professor Marston. Didn't work, so I came to US and really trained in a classic British fashion, clinical neurology. The method is still the same, although imaging has changed it. I trained with no CT scan.
Right.
I used to do my own angiograms and pneumoencephalograms back in India. So for us, clinical exam was everything almost. Right. And I tell you, the field of movement disorders is the last bastion, remaining bastion of clinical neurology. And so it was a natural fit. I was passionate about clinical observation and analyzing phenomenology. And so I had an opportunity. My chair asked me if I wanted to go do a fellowship with Dr. Fawn. And I said, no way, I have done 9 years, I'm not going. And basically, I just woke up one morning and that's not true. I did 6 months of basic lab, rat medicine, dopamine and toxic. MPTP was very popular during those days. And I dissected rat brains, and then the Hindu in me spoke up that this is not for me. So I said, I can't.
So it only took
rats.
you 6 months to figure that out.
Well, yes, and it was exciting. I mean, I really published quite a few abstracts and some papers early on basic science and wrote a grant, but then I said, this is not me. So since then, I've been focused on clinical movement disorders. As you know, that's been my passion.
Yeah. And in terms of movement disorders, you got in due to Parkinson's disease, but your interests have really run the gamut from drug-induced movement disorders to phenomenology of most movement disorders. Where did that come from, and what's your favorite of all of these,
so
if there is one?
That's a difficult question. It's almost like asking which one of my children is my favorite. But, advantage of being in a small place. Mine was the first movement disorder clinic in Georgia. I started before Emory did. Ray Watts came later. Is that you get patients of all kinds. So I was the only one. I didn't have a fellow. I didn't have another physician working with me. So I had to see whatever came.
Right.
All sorts of exotic movement disorders. And MRI had just come out around that time. So we were looking for things. I remember I wrote The Eye of the Tiger. And these were people I showed to everybody. Nobody could diagnose them till MRI came.
So explain that for a second. So you wrote the initial paper on Eye of the Tiger.
Right, but it was just good luck. I mean, these were the patients, I couldn't figure them out. An MRI, the radiologist goes, this is bilateral basal ganglia hemorrhage. I said, no, this is a chronically progressive condition. You're seeing iron. This is Hellerward-Spatz, the old name for PANC2. And anyway, so that's hyperkinetic dystonia. I've been interested in the neurodegeneration with brain iron accumulation. The drug-induced movement disorder connection came from the Veterans Hospital. I worked both with psychiatry patients and neurology. So I can't say I have a favorite, but I'm definitely very interested in genotype-phenotype correlations and really describing in detail, because this is a watershed moment in medicine with all these next-generation sequencing everything else, people may jump to doing that rather than a good clinical exam and analysis. And I think that will be unfortunate, because it's still the role of clinical expertise is paramount. That's the number one thing you need. You need to select the right people for the right test rather than just doing a next generation sequencing. And I think this generation we'll still probably continue some clinical stuff, but it may go away. I still think we are necessary.
So we talked a little bit of eye of the tiger. What would you say your biggest contributions have been to our field? And there are a bunch of them, so.
Well, that's very kind that you say that. I think I'm a neurology, movement disorders and neurology entertainer. I think that's.
You're definitely an entertainer.
No, but I mean, if you ask me what the biggest contribution, now NeuroBowl we started 20 years ago almost, and it's become a huge success. We keep waiting for it to be finished, dropped, no. And Tony Lang, of course, came up with the idea of video challenge, but I was a natural fit because they knew I was doing NeuroBowl, and we've done video challenge for the last 10 years almost. So I would say my biggest contribution has been to educate neurologists, residents, and entertain them at the same way. I think you learn more when you're not just focused on a book or something, but you're actually being entertained and something stick in your head. So it's taken off. I do NeuroBowl all over the world now.
When you were a kid, were you an entertainer too? Because you're an absolute natural at doing that.
My dad used to put me on stage. I used to sing. And as
Still
early
do
as,
sing.
Yes, I do, but don't ask me to sing now. My dad was a musician in addition to being an Ayurvedic physician, and my sister, almost like she was 1 year older, he'll put us on stage in front of hundreds of people when he was 5 or 6. So I grew quite fearless, and that really has helped me. And again, be yourself when you're on the stage. Don't try to fake it. and sometimes that entertainment it tips over and you cross into dangerous territory, and that's the other thing you have to avoid when you're up there. But I've not been successful at that, so that's not something I want to talk about.
Okay, I won't go there then. From a role model standpoint, we've heard about your dad. Other people who have been major role models for you?
But clearly, the single biggest influence on me was the Unusual Movement Disorder Symposium at the AAM, run by, it used to be run twice, Dr. Fawn and Dr. David Marston. So
for hours on hours.
Hours, and those were the old days, and I really participated very actively. I brought, at early as 1985, I was bringing cases and discussing, and again, somewhat naive, I thought I knew more than I did, so I had the courage to get up and sort of discuss and speak, and those two have been the biggest influence on my life because they were my role models as clinicians. David Marston, of course, was a wonderful scientist as well, and Dr. Fawn as well. I don't think that I pursued that, but certainly in the field of clinical movement disorders, those are the two people I have tried to emulate.
So you've talked about the young people, and I know you've been a tremendous role model for others and for both the docs who have come through your program and your children who have become doctors as well. What advice do you have to these young people? You sort of alluded to the fact that medicine is changing and there's tests that we didn't have when we were young. What sort of advice do you have to the young doctors coming up?
Right. When I examine patients, I still touch them. I take their pulse, which is kind of, I don't know what I'm feeling, but there is that old doctor-patient relationship. Don't forget that you're dealing with the whole person. You're dealing with a person with insecurities and also fears, and they come to you for advice, and you have to be compassionate. Number one thing in medicine, that's something we might lose if we just rely on tests and more tests. Also, make sure you work with some basic scientists. If you're going to do clinical research, you got to have some understanding of basic science, and then take that and do some translational work as you are developing your careers, and choose a mentor. Find a mentor. That's so important in medicine even now. And don't forget clinical judgment and clinical examination. You should have some hypotheses before you start to order a bunch of tests. Yes.
So one of the issues in medicine that we constantly hear about is work-life balance. Now, I spend a lot of time with you not at work, which is good, golfing and doing other things, but
Right.
how have you managed the work-life balance issue? And what are
Well,
your other passions?
Yeah, I have tried not to work too hard all the time. I mean, clearly I like to travel a good bit. Play golf, not very well, as you know.
Oh, no, you play well.
And the other thing I do is still have maintained some interest in music. My daughter and son-in-law have a band. We have made some CDs together, and I still play tabla.
What is tabla?
That's a Indian drum, and I keep busy, and I probably would devote a lot more time to those activities as I slow down in
Right.
medicine.
Tell me about the Movement Disorder Society. So the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society, you've played a major role. And how do you see that in your career, and how do you see that going forward?
Well, I think this has been the best development in the field of movement disorders, because we have consolidated people from different interests, basic scientists, but the clinician, the functional neuroimaging, and all that's come into the society, and membership's growing, we're reaching all corners of the world, and it's really been a blessing to me. The timing was 85 is when I started movement disorders, and that's when Movement Disorder Society is formed. Journal started. I published in the second ever issue of Movement
Which
Disorders.
paper was that? Do you
It
remember?
was a patient with generalized chorea of abrupt onset, and at autopsy, this is before MRI, she had multiple lacunar infarcts in basal ganglia.
Wow.
And it was acute onset but generalized, so
Right.
she decompensated. Amazing case, Ballism chorea bilateral. That was the first paper I published in movement disorders. And you know, it's been a mutually beneficial relationship. I worked in several committees, industry relations committee, strategic committee, and you name it. I'm working with them now for developing the ICD-11, the movement disorder
Right.
section. That's been going on with WHO for about 6 years. And it's given back as much as I gave to Movement Disorder Society. I think just to see it develop into what it is a joy. And I think it's going to go, it's going to grow. It's already the premier organization of movement disorder. It's going to grow into going into sections and then going into smaller countries that are underserved. I think that's where the future is.
And you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but barriers that you faced, any issues that you faced other than what you mentioned in England in terms of being able to get a position back then?
Yes, so I think that was the only thing early on that I thought could have been a barrier, but it was a blessing. Because I came to the US and I dare say that's the greatest country in the world. It gave me everything. I walked in with a suitcase and nothing else. And my chair was supportive, my colleagues have been supportive, occasionally laugh at my V pronunciation, but other than that, nobody has. They've always encouraged. It's been great. It's really been a wonderful time that I've had in the USA, and timing was great. That's not something you can choose when you're born and where you're
Correct.
born, and that really helped me. I have encountered really no barriers in the USA. I can be what I want to be.
So I'm going to end this on a topic which you always light up with many things, but you light up most for me when you talk about your family and your children, your grandchildren.
Yes.
Just tell us, your wife is a physician, that must have played a role in where you moved and how you lived your life, but just tell us a little bit about that.
So yes, she's been the stabilizing force in my life for 38 years. I've known her 40. She's a neurologist. My daughter is a palliative care physician in North Carolina. My younger son is trying to get to med school. He probably will soon. And the grandkids are a joy. Now, my wife doesn't like to travel with me too much, which is okay, because early on, I didn't travel a whole lot, and she was busy as a resident, and I was Mr. Mom. I would give the children a bath and feed them and sing to them and read to them. So now she lets me loose, but she won't travel with me. But she's really the force that keeps me grounded. She's been wonderful for
And
me.
the grandchildren keep you grounded also, huh?
Well, they're just bundle of joy, you know. I just laugh and smile and spoil them. That's my job.
And sing to them.
I do. They sing to me.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. You've contributed a tremendous amount to the society and to the field, and I was very, very, very pleased to be able to interview you.
Thank you, Chuck. You're a dear friend. Appreciate it.